polls to vote on school budgets, and they approved just over 93% of them. Districts already dealing with cuts in state aid relied on layoffs, on building closures, and other measures to keep their spending down. But most still included property tax increases above the 2% limit that Governor Cuomo is proposing now in a tax cap. This, of course, begins the debate in earnest over the fact that voters approved those budgets and what that means for the chances of a tax cap passing before June 20th. Joining me now is School Boards Association Executive Director Tim Kremer. Tim, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Liz.
So actually, it was, as I mentioned, just over 93%. That is not historic, but it's up there. Is that right?
Yeah, we're very pleased. We had predicted plus 90. It would seem to have gone that way based on the last couple of years, and we were very pleased to see it's actually closer to 94, I'm told.
Do we have any idea about the turnout at this point?
Yeah, somewhere between 15, I think around 14% was the turnout. Historically, it had been as low as 10% on average. On a good year, we might get as high as 20%. This is still disappointing. I don't know why people don't turn out for something as important as this, but 14% turned out.
Yeah, it's actually always really sort of baffling to me. I mean, people like to complain about their taxes, and really the property taxes for education is the name of the game, and that's largely where it comes from, although
Right.
also to fund municipal government, and they don't show up to have their voices heard, and yet they like to complain. It doesn't really make very much sense to me.
Well, now is the tough part, because now that those budgets are in place, we have to tell people what the consequences are. And people are confused. They say, well, we passed this budget, so there won't be any layoffs. Will there? There won't be any program cuts. Well, no, actually, the way we got those spending plans to the point where we did, average increase of about 1.2% spending increase, was because we were implementing layoffs, program cuts, and other sorts of factors.
Right.
And those will have to take place.
Do you think actually voters weren't aware of that?
Well, I think they were to some extent, but it's one of those things where I think once they don't connect the dots easily, where they find out that that the budget has been passed, I think they think all is well. And unfortunately, there's going to be some tough consequences because of these budgets.
Yeah, the average statewide tax increase was 3.4%. That is, of course, 1.4% above that 2% cap that the governor is now proposing, has been proposing, is going around the state
Right.
and pushing with voters. And, you know, we're seeing the Siena poll today that shows that the cap continues to be incredibly popular, actually the #1 priority for New Yorkers, not only just for Andrew Cuomo. What do you believe that we can learn from the budget vote on Tuesday going forward to know about the tax cap negotiations?
Well, it seems kind of ironic. You have 94% of the budgets get passed on an average tax levy of more than 3%. And here the governor is saying we should be capping tax levies at 2%.
Right.
I mean, my response to him is, Governor, honestly, it sounds like the people know what they're doing. They turn out, they vote for their budgets, they even realize that these are tough times. They vote for their budgets. I'm not sure we need a 2% tax cap, and in fact, if you do bring in a tax cap, it sounds to me like 2% is too low.
Well, you also actually did have some districts that voted down their budgets. Have you been able to break down the numbers enough to know that were those districts areas where the property tax cap was proposed, property tax increase was proposed to be particularly high?
Yeah, I do have that. There's, you know, if 94% passed, there were 6% that did not pass. It would appear that their spending increases were on average 2.1% as opposed to 1.2% for those that passed. Their tax levy increases were as high as 6.1% on average, much more than what those that passed. Here's a weird one, though. The lowest that we saw, and we saw several of them at this point, with a tax levy increase of only 1.8%, Cambridge, for example, they went down. Don't know why.
See, this really goes to show you that all politics is local, right? A lot of stuff, for example, in East Ramapo, there was a huge battle for control of the school board between the Orthodox Jewish community, a large Orthodox Jewish community, and some secular folks. Now, the Orthodox Jewish folks who were on the board won, but that's very specialized and specific to that particular area, and much like it probably is all over the state.
In every one of these ones where it's gone down, or in some cases gone up. We had one, for example, on Long Island, William Floyd, where they passed a 12.5% tax levy.
Right.
Now, I don't know what the circumstances were, but the people really rallied around that one. But yes, you're absolutely right. Whenever we see one go down in particular, there's something happening there that is causing that strife. Likely what will happen in places where those budgets went down is they're going to regroup. They're probably going to retool that budget. They'll bring it back for a second vote on June 21st. And my expectations are that most of those will pass on the second time around.
See, you could argue, actually, that it adds fuel to the opponents who say, okay, in that tax cap bill, there is a provision that says, well, if 60% of the people who live in your district want to blow through that cap, then you can go ahead and do that and raise the taxes higher, if that is in fact something that the district feels the need to do. Problem is that folks who are in wealthier districts usually feel like that's okay. They can go ahead and maybe they can pay a little more, like out on Long Island, for example. The problem is that people in lower income districts don't feel that way, and then the students get penalized in the end.
As we've looked at Massachusetts, for example, that's exactly what has happened. There's been a greater chasm between the haves and the have-nots because it's the haves districts who are willing, who have more disposable income. Maybe they have some higher expectations for achievement. Whatever it is, they're willing to go out there and try to get that override, and sometimes are successful. Those districts that are poorer districts, they don't have a chance of putting an override up. They know that's going to get killed.
So these numbers really, I mean, I've seen them spun in a couple of different ways now. Of course, the State Teachers Union it sees them in one light, and the governor's office probably sees them in another. There is another piece of education news that I wanted to talk to you about, and that is the Regents. The Board of Regents has approved a teacher evaluation system, statewide teacher evaluation system. It's not a done deal yet because it needs to be negotiated, again, with teachers unions. However, your organization has a particular, some skin in the game on this one.
Oh, absolutely. It's our job to make sure that we provide a good educational program and that educators are held accountable. And this is the first time through this, what is called the annual professional performance review. It's a teacher and principal evaluation system that will link student test data, student performance, to teacher and principal performance. Some objective data will be used to evaluate professional performance. It's the first time we'll ever be doing that in this state.
Well, when you say objective test data, I think there are probably folks out there who say that they don't believe that that test data is so objective at all. I mean, for example, I've got friends who teach in lower income districts and say, well, my kids are not necessarily performing as well as maybe other kids are in higher income districts, and yet from year to year their improvement might have been better. Maybe. I mean, do you not think that, do you really believe, I should ask, if you think that tests are actually such an objective measure of standards by which to measure teacher performance and principals, which is a really good point to make?
We're probably not there yet. We've got a lot of work to do on the quality of the assessments and linking them to the evaluation system. But there's a couple things that I would respond to that. Number one, the measurement is both progress and achievement.
Right.
So certain kid showing up at the classroom who has a long way to go, we're not expecting that kid to be at the same place as every other kid in that class at the end of the year. Certain kids are going to be on a different trajectory than other kids. We understand that. And we do believe that there is a 60%. Realize that using this objective data only accounts for 40% of the evaluation system. 60% of it will still be accounting for things like poverty, like the disadvantages that student brings to the table, previous educational experiences, things like that. The subjective side of things will still be a part of the evaluation process.
In the opinion of the School Boards Association, does this statewide teacher evaluation system now put to rest the push to repeal last in, first out?
No. I think this is actually a tool that will lead eventually to something that will allow us to include it as one of the elements to consider when making layoff decisions beyond just seniority. Right now, the only thing we're using is seniority, which is fairly objective. When did you start here?
Yeah.
But if we have the ability to use evaluation data, plus looking at the credentials of this particular individual who might be considered for layoff, plus the needs of this particular school. The workforce you had in place 10, 15 years ago for a student population that was in place 10 or 15 years ago might have been perfect. Today, we have kids coming from all over the world with special needs, special skills. I may need a different workforce today than I had 10 or 15 years ago, and I'd like to take that into account.
Well, and again, the reason why we're talking about these teacher evaluations is because there is, it's of course, education is always a big issue. However, a lot of these budgets that we started off discussing included teacher layoffs, and that's why perhaps there's actually an elevated interest and significance in how you're making a decision about cutting teachers, particularly down in New York City, where Mayor Bloomberg says he wants to cut 4,100 teachers. That's a really big number.
Well, exactly. LIFO wasn't on the radar screen at all until recently, when all of a sudden we found ourselves having to make some layoff decisions and learning that the only way in which you could do that was based on seniority, and that's making for some choices that are not good for kids.
Tim Kremer, I want to thank you very much. It's great to see you, and of course you will be back, but it is good to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Liz.